Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and today I'm going to continue on with my recommended changes for every faction. You may have heard some of these recommended changes before if you watch some of my other videos, but I've been finding that subscribers have been asking me to just create a video specifically for each faction. And as I've gone back and rewatched my unit review videos to add time codes, because that was another thing people have been asking me to do with some of my older videos, it gave me a refresher on what all these units do with their empowered units, abilities I mean, and kind of got a refamiliarity with some units that I don't regularly use, and it gave me some more ideas for some recommended changes. Now, I do appreciate that I would not recommend that they make all the changes that I'm going to go over for every faction. I just want to give my thoughts on some potential changes that Slytherin could do to make all these units be a little more viable. So what I'd like to see is every build be viable for every faction, and so every unit can kind of feel like it has its own niche ability here, because right now it definitely seems like there's some units that are definitely lagging behind. And you know, the Tyranids, the biggest gaping wound in their roster is that they don't have a really good anti-armored ranged unit. So I hope that they'll eventually add that in, because that would really make the Tyranids be much more complete, because currently the only one they have is the Hive Guards, and they're pretty easy to kill. So as I go through them, I'll kind of give my thoughts on that as well. Now, again, I don't expect them to enact every one of these changes because it would make the faction potentially too unbalanced, but I'm just giving a bunch of listed recommended changes, and Slytherin could kind of choose which ones they want to enact. Now, Slytherin does have a Discord channel where they recommend that if you have suggested changes to the units that you apply those at that Discord channel. Now, I've submitted multiple changes and I've really found some of those changes to be enacted, so I figured I'd just have the videos set up with each faction. And if you have other recommended changes that you'd recommend for units in the roster, comment below in these videos. And who knows, since Slytherin is going through and rebalancing different factions, maybe somebody from Slytherin would see these videos and then see all of our recommended changes for their units in one spot, and maybe that would help them get some additional opinions on what they should do. But do be aware that there is an official channel if you wanted to submit your own thoughts directly there. So if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe. And with that, I will get started on my thoughts on some changes. So the first unit that I'd like to see maybe some slight tweaks to is the Hive Tyrant. Now, he's a fantastic unit. The issue is he's very hard for you to get 400 points out of value out of him, because he's a flying unit, so he will pretty much get sniped out of the sky like nobody's business. So my thoughts are, for him to see him get used more is either a slight decrease in the amount of requisition to bring him out. Now, he still needs to be expensive because he has great abilities, he does great damage, he's good at everything, but he's easy to kill. So a slight decrease in the amount of requisition that he costs may cause more players to bring him out. The other option is you could give him a slight tweak in his HP and or evasion, and that would make this guy be able to survive a little more hits, allowing your faction to get more bonus uses out of him. Because if you get him into melee, then chances are you're just going to get flanked and then get killed. If you're going to sit and shoot, if you're left out in the open, then things like Hellblasters will just snipe them out of the sky, or the Tau will snipe them out with their railguns. So it's just very easy for this guy to get killed. And if you're playing 2,000 points, you know, this guy's 20% of your roster's points, so that's a huge commitment, and you can get almost 2 of any other HQ commander for the cost of the one Hive Tyrant. So I would just like to see some minor changes there. The other thing I'd like to see changed is the tier 1 command point ability for the Tyranids. Right now it removes Overwatch and 50% of the momentum that the units have gained. I would kind of like to see it just be a straight up momentum decrease by like 30. That way you just have a fixed amount instead of 50%. Alternatively, what they could do is increase it to be a 4x4 square instead of a 3x3, because it just seems like the 3x3 isn't quite big enough for you to want to sacrifice one of your command points to get that ability off. So I just think a minor buff there would definitely help. Now the Biovore here, this guy I would like to see changed a little bit. The first thing I would like to point out is he currently has no empowered ability, because before his empowered ability would reduce the cooldown on the speed spores, or seed spores, but since that's already been changed and buffed with prior patches, he now no longer has an empowered ability. So what I'd like to see is for his empowered ability, if you use the seed spores, that it would summon in 2 spores. That way you could get additional bonuses of the spores if you wanted to. Otherwise you're just going to do double attacks. My other thought is that the other recommendation I would have is when you're using the seed spore, man, I can't talk, that it increases the armor piercing. Now I wouldn't want it to be the equivalent of the third command point ability, because that's actually an anti-armor vehicle damage. But what happens is you pop down these seed spores, but they can't really do much damage to vehicles or anything that's a little more armored. So I would like to just see it have more armor piercing if you're going to use this ability. Otherwise, what you're going to want to do is just do your regular attack, and this is not nearly as impressive. But if it had more armor piercing, then it just leads to some more dynamic play. Otherwise, you're sacrificing your attack for a spore that only has a few HP, and it's like, what's the point? So I'd like to see the seed spores just have more armor piercing damage. That way it can mitigate you not having that attack not be as painful. So I think by having that have an increased armor piercing, that could be much better and make you have to decide, do you want to use more of an armor piercing spore, or do you want to have more of an anti-infantry attack? I think that would lead to just a little more dynamic gameplay, and that may help. So locking down vehicles and things like that with your seed spore here with the mine versus just killing the infantry. The next recommended change I would have is for the Exocrine. Now he's a very good unit against anti-infantry. What I'd like to see is an extra ability here where he has the ability to load up an ammunition to make him an anti-vehicle killer. So he'll do like 40 to 60 damage pretty consistently against vehicles. But I'd like to see something where it's like every 3 turns, instead of using the plasmatic buildup, he would have another icon here and just have an armor piercing attack. That would, give you 8 or 9 armor piercing and do, 80 to 100 damage or something like that. And then you could decide, do you want to use your synaptic targeting to boost up and buff up your anti-vehicle attack, or do you want to have your anti-infantry attack? So and you could alter those damages however you want, but I just think having these guys be a really good ranged anti-vehicle killer in addition to an anti-infantry every 2 turns would make this to be much more viable. And again, if you had this and the Hive Guards, I think that would make the Tyranids be much more rounded against factions that have a lot more armor. And I think that would overall just be an easier change to make. I don't think they could do that change just to the baseline cannon, because then the plasmatic buildup is probably going to be too powerful. But I suppose that would be an alternative option, as you just increase the base damage here. But again, I think that's going to make it way too powerful when you use the plasmatic buildup, because then it's going to start one-shotting Terminators and other more high-value infantry units, and I don't think that's really the point, and I think that's going to frustrate a lot of people unless you significantly increase their cost, which I don't think they're going to want to do. So that's my thought there. Just a general change that I'd like to see is I would like the descriptions of weapons that have poisons, like the Hive Tyrant or the Venom Thrope, which then has the poison here, or the acidic ability with the Tyrannifexes or the Thornbacks, or the Gargoyles. I'd like it to say how much damage, poison damage, it's going to be applying to units, or acid damage. And what I'd also like is if you're attacking somebody with an acid damage or a poison damage, either one, if one of those is stronger than the first one that's applied, then the more damaging ability will be carried over onto the following turn, because there's nothing worse than you using the blinding venom with the Gargoyles here, which will apply a 15-point poison damage, and then attack with the Hive Tyrant, and then the 15-point point damage from the Blinding Venom carries over instead of the 40 point damage from the Heavy Venom Cannon. So I would just like that to be clarified. So the strongest poison or acid is always applied and carried over to the following turn, and then state specifically how much of that damage it is, just with either the description, add a box on here that says poison, or just in the description of the ability itself saying that the poison is there, because newer players aren't going to realize that this can actually do damage. And then I think they're going to also be looking at this Heavy Venom Cannon and be like, oh man, this thing sucks, it only has 12 to 16 splash damage, not realizing that they're going to have a powerful poison attack that's applied the following turn. And the same thing with the other weapons here. You know, I don't think people necessarily understand that acids apply damage to vehicles and poisons apply damage to infantry. That's really not well explained, so I'd like them to just clarify that. Going along with that ability, I wish it would specify that the blinding poison does not work on Necron units. They're immune to the blinding poison, and also state that it doesn't apply debuffs to vehicles. So I think they just need to clarify their explanation here. Now ideally I'd like to see the blinding poison still affect Necrons, because the fact that it'll work on stealth suits and other units, I don't see why the Necrons have the immunity. I think what the game does is it's just saying, well, those guys are considered organics, whereas the Necron warriors are inorganics. But I think that's just a stupid thing. So I would like to see that change, either just a change in the description, clarifying it for newer players, or to make some changes so the Necrons don't have immunity to that. The next unit I'd like to see changed are the Genestealers. Now they have very good damage potential, but the problem is they're very expensive, and then people currently don't use them and the Broodlord together. So I think they need to make changes to both of these units, so then there'll be a better, you could do like a Genestealer build or a Synaptic build. Right now it doesn't feel like you can do, it just feels like the Synaptic build is just so much better than the Genestealer build that nobody ever does it. So I would like to see this changed. So how I would recommend doing this is either a base change to the Genestealers, either giving them a HP buff or increasing their evasion further, and then knowing that they'll become incredibly high evasion once you get a bunch of them together, which seems like it would be reasonable, but they are still going to be weak against flame. So what my other thought is, if you didn't want to just change their base stats and maybe increase their cost depending on how much of a buff you're giving them, would be either to increase the range of the Brood Telepathy by 2 boxes, kind of like what they do for the Evolved Brood Telepathy, and then you'd significantly increase the range of the Evolved Brood Telepathy, and then also have the Broodlords be able to buff each other instead of only getting the buffs from the Genestealers here. But the other option you could do is the Synapses give you 3 buffs, so you get the momentum gains, the accuracy, and the evasion. My thought here is that because you only get the evasion and momentum gains here, is maybe you add another a third category here where you get bonus HP. So, you know, 5% bonus HP per unit that's around there, and then you get 20% bonus HP if, you know, you had 4 of them here, or maybe even make it a little bit better, and then all of a sudden your Broodlords are going to be a lot stronger too, because they're going to get those stacks on here, and I think that would make these guys be a much more viable option. It would also make these guys be incredibly scary, because now they could potentially start surviving flame attacks, and then you could do more damage and really make people have to focus fire these guys down. But currently, you know, having to keep them so close together, trying to get their evasion, and then just having somebody with a flamer come in there and just kill everybody, it just doesn't feel good. So Genestealers got to be buffed. That's an example of how I'd recommend doing it. Or it could be a combination where you add the bonus HP and you buff their baseline statistics further, so they just become pure monsters. But currently, it doesn't make any sense to do that when you can just start getting your Hormigons here and get 2 of them for the cost of 1 of these guys, and then have their Synapses going, the Swarm Tactics, and the Leap ability and other things. I mean, yes, these guys will do amazing damage and they have good armor piercing, but it's just so hard to get these guys into combat, as most of your opponents are going to want to just kill these, focus fire these guys down, because you're unlikely to make a whole bunch of them with how they currently are. And then with only the 5 evasion, even when they're mixed in with these guys, they still get just focus fired down. So I think really buffing those guys up with their Brood Telepathy would make them much, much better. So that's my thought there. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Another option would be is if they added more Genestealer units to the game, and then you'd have more units that would use the Brood Telepathy, but I don't know if we can guarantee that they're going to have more models released for the Tyranids. So I think just making some additional buffs, because the Brood Telepathy just doesn't feel good enough for the sheer amount of points that you're having to put into those units. The next unit that I would recommend be buffed or changed would be the Hive Guard. So I have a couple of thoughts here. One is you could increase their armor, because I don't know, these guys seem like they should be big, bulky, they're covered in armor, they should be harder to kill and harder to snipe. So if you made these guys more durable, then that would make it so you could use them to actually get it, because they have to get within 3 range to get into the optimal range for the shockwave cannon. And once these guys are down, you effectively don't have a good ranged anti-armor unit. So if these guys have to be so close, I'd like to see them be a little more tanky. Likewise, you could also just increase their health further, and then they would be able to take more of a hit and not be sniped down quite as easily, or maybe even a combination of the two. My other thought for changes for these guys is to give them an ability where they get like a guard ability that they can use that'll give them like a defensive shield wall ability that'll either let these guys heal themselves slightly, or will give them bonus HP or bonus armor to allow them to survive. And maybe even you do that for like a free action, so when you're moving in to get some attacks, you would use that, and that would allow them to run in, soak up Overwatch, and then get some shots off, and then be a little more tanky, and then make it like a 3-turn cooldown. So I think any of those kind of changes would be cool. Now I doubt they're going to want to create an extra ability, because that's going to actually be some work. So maybe some slight HP changes or armor changes, or maybe even a little decrease in the cost of the requisition, so you can then bring out other units to help get more anti-vehicle, because currently bringing out 3 of these guys at 165 is a big cost, and that's, you know, almost the cost of a prime here. So, you know, that would be another option, is you just reduce the cost, I suppose. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. My only other recommended change that I would have for the Hive Guard is increasing the base armor piercing, and that way they can also do more damage against infantry. Now obviously you don't want to make it too powerful, but I think even just increasing the armor piercing to 3 will allow it to do a little more damage against basic infantry, but currently it's just absolutely abysmal against infantry. And then if they don't have any vehicles with them, or you've killed the vehicles, these guys are no longer able to do much to help you. Even after they're buffed up, because you don't get any of those spine bonuses unless you're attacking the vehicles. So I think slightly tweaking the armor piercing here would allow them to have more versatility against even attacking some infantry once you've taken out the enemy vehicles. So that could be a potential way to help them as well. Now, the next unit I'd like to see tweaked is the Pyrovore. Now, I was totally wrong on this unit. I thought this was going to be like the backbone of Tyranid forces, because they're incredibly powerful, but I didn't realize how easy they were to snipe down. And then when you have a unit that has the volatile trait, getting sniped down left and right, blowing up on your own units, it just feels really bad, especially because the Tyrannifex is not significantly increased cost, is harder to kill, and has better damage, especially against vehicles. So my thought here is we got to try to figure out a role for him. Now, I think it is kind of fun that they have the volatile, but I suppose one option is you just remove the volatile trait and then slightly increase the cost, and then I would think the Pyrovores would be coming out more. My other thought is that you increase the amount of armor that the burning spray can get rid of. So maybe even increase it to a -3 and then make it a -4 if you have it empowered. And then my other thought is, or my other criticism, I should say, is that these guys, when you have the burning spray, if you apply the burning spray from a non-empowered ability and then you apply it from an empowered ability, it's kind of like the poison and acid situation, is it'll only apply the one that's put on there first. Now it will refresh the 2-turn expiration, but it'll be at whatever minus armor the first trait that was applied. So it can feel really bad if you have two of these guys, you put the burning spray on with one, and then you save up to have the other one empowered, and you apply it to a vehicle thinking, oh, now I'm going to kill it. Well, you just wasted your ability because only the weaker version of the burning spray is applied to the enemy unit. So focusing on making that a little bit better, I think, would be much better. So let me know your thoughts on that. I do think it's kind of fun to have the volatile trait and having these guys kind of explode, but the problem is because of that, there's just not a viable build style with these Pyrovores effectively, because you can't have them being body blocked with your low tier infantry, because when they blow up, everything will die around it. So I kind of like to see that be removed, and that way the Pyrovores would be used more. But yeah, definitely couldn't have been more wrong about that unit. I really thought that was going to be an MVP, but after using it on actual matches, nobody ever brings the Pyrovores. The Thornback I'm actually pretty happy with. Again, I'd like it to say how much acid and poison damage it's applying per turn. And the other thing I'd like to see is that it indicate which of these units are going to have reaction fire. So, you know, telling people that they're going to have reaction fire with the Devourer, or clarifying with the Termagants that you're going to get a zone of control with the Spine Fist and just have better damage here. So just kind of clarifying the explanations of some of these abilities so newer players know what they're getting, because I don't think it's clear like what the advantages of different weapon kits are. I mean, they'll notice like, oh, here for the cost of 10 I'm getting a little more range and more attacks and more damage, but they're not going to know that the Spine Fist give you a zone of control and then Overwatch a reaction fire. So again, telling newer players, just clarifying that in the descriptions what these different loadouts are going to do so it's much more clear, will be very beneficial. Now the Trygon, I have a couple of thoughts here. Now this may make these guys too overpowered, so again, let me know what your thoughts are. But what I would like to see is the Bioelectric Pulse have more armor piercing, because right now it's low armor piercing, and so when it gets applied to things like the Death Company, it may apply like 10 to 15 damage, where if it's an unarmored unit, then it's going to be doing the full 30 to 40. I'd like to see it just be like a pure damage situation, or just giving it more armor piercing. And then my other thought is, you know, the burrow ability, it's very good, but the fact that it gives you minus 20 evasion I think is kind of weird. I would actually like to see it give you an evasion bonus. That way it's like, not only is this guy jumping behind enemy lines and getting kills, but then they really have to kind of piss their pants when this happens and make it a little bit harder for this guy to get killed when he's that first turn that he uses this ability. So I'd actually like to see it have like a plus 15 evasion or something, or a plus 10, so it brings it up to 15, so it actually makes them harder to kill, that burrowing ability, because you're just going to be behind enemy lines most likely using your attacks or your Bioshock ability, and so that would make these guys be a little more problematic, because again, currently we're having trouble killing vehicles when you're playing as the Tyranid, so you got to give us some options that make these guys better at killing vehicles. So I'm trying to give several potential solutions here, but having these guys be minus 20 evasion just means the following turn pretty much everybody in the enemy roster that's not locked into a zone of control is going to be able to get shots onto this guy and get the kill. So I'd like to make them just a little harder to kill by giving them those bonuses. Now my other thought here, oh, and then my other thing I wanted to say is, again, it does actually say this, so it just says enemy units. Sometimes I have newer players scared to use this ability because I think it's going to be all units, but they do actually clarify that it's enemy units, so that's good. I was going to say add that if they didn't, but they actually do, so people just need to learn how to read including myself, I guess. So my other thought here, and again, I doubt they're going to do this, but with the Tyrannifex here, like on Gladius, the Tyrannifex has a anti-vehicle variant, so if you could sacrifice, you know, the acid spray weapon here and give him the long cannon like he has on Gladius, that could be good, and that would allow him to be a good anti-vehicle. You'd have to decide you want to be an anti-vehicle killer or an anti-infantry. The other option is the warriors, like on Dawn of War 2. They have the option to have an anti-vehicle loadout, so adding an anti-vehicle weapon to the warriors would be another option as well. So again, it just feels like they need a ranged anti-vehicle killer. I think the easiest option would be with the Exocrine here, instead of having to change your models with the warriors or the Tyrannifex, or you just buff up your Hive Guards, I guess, is the other option, and you just really make these guys strong and maybe even make them more expensive depending on how much you're buffing them. But I think some of these minor tweaks are definitely going to help plug those holes that you have in the roster now, because I definitely get very frustrated having to play against units that have lots of flamers, and especially if they're armored, because I just can't tend to get through them, and so doing some of these changes will just make it more viable. Now, again, I kind of alluded to this already, but the Genestealer Broodlord does not feel good. So I think there's several potential changes. Is one, you reduce the cost of the Broodlord. You give him a slight tweak to his evasion. And I think what you also need to do is increase the range of the paroxysm. I would like to see it go up to 5 tiles, because you're doing good psychic damage. But then more importantly, you're deactivating the Overwatch and giving an accuracy penalty. And I'd actually like to see that accuracy penalty last for 2 turns instead of 1 turn. So I think all those things together would make this guy be much more viable, and you can kind of mix and match whichever options you want to do. I already talked about with the Genestealers that I think the Evolved Brood Telepathy needs to change, and I'd like to see it have a bonus HP. But what I'd like to see is the Broodlords be able to buff each other, so you get stacks with the 2 Broodlords together, because currently they're only getting stacks with the Genestealers, is my understanding. And then what I'd also like to see is, since I was recommending that the Brood Telepathy have a little bit of increased range, that if you brought the Broodlords out, you could give them like a 4x4 or a 5x5 range, and that way these guys could just be buffing themselves anywhere that they're somewhat close to each other, and then that would make a Genestealer build be very, very viable and very, very frustrating to deal with. But they shouldn't be having too much, because if you're bringing 2 of these guys, that's 400 plus 65 here, and that would make these guys be very powerful, and I think it would make a Genestealer build be very viable. So I think that could be potentially a fun option. Another option is you just increase the splash for the monstrous rending claws, give them an additional splash, so do ×2 instead of the ×1, so these guys can be a little bit better killing infantry as well. But again, that might make these guys a little bit too powerful, but I do think there needs to be some changes, because people rarely bring much for Genestealers or the Broodlords, and so there needs to be some sort of buffs to make it be much more powerful, so it's comparable to you wanting to abandon your synaptic leaders here, because like I said, it's currently not in a good state. So with that, those are my thoughts for changes to the Tyranid units. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Maybe some of these are too overpowered. Maybe some of them aren't powerful enough. Do you have better ideas on what you'd recommend for changes? I just want to see every unit be able to fill some sort of niche, but I definitely find that that's not really the case for many of these units. So hopefully with some of these changes, their abilities will become more viable, and different builds will be a better option as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content. And if there's changes that you think I didn't discuss, or you have ideas for better changes to these units, comment below so we can have all of our recommendations in one spot in case unlikely situation occurs where somebody from Slytherin sees this series and they want to enact some of these changes. Take it easy, guys.